So, today I want to talk about returning to making videos. It's been almost a year at this point since I last put out a video on this channel. And while I have been keeping up with Sunday streams, the Discord, and the wider community, I did want to share with you all a bit about why my videos themselves stopped and where things are planned to go in the near future. Now, for those who don't know, a little over a year ago, my mother passed away rather suddenly. And her loss was a shock to me that I really didn't know how to respond to or process. Honestly, it was that suddenness that got to me more than anything, where one day she was fine, and then the next she wasn't. And then the doctor said she would recover just fine, and then she didn't. So, obviously, in response to this, I needed time to not only process the suddenness of this loss, but to actually grieve about it. Now, my response to grieving when it came to this channel probably wasn't the best in hindsight. I really did just try to jump back in and make videos as soon as I possibly could, and to focus on social issues instead of that sinking feeling that I was feeling inside me day in and day out. During that time, I did manage to get a few videos out, but really what I needed was time for myself, my thoughts, and my feelings. And once I realized that, I needed to stop making videos for a bit. I needed time to grieve, to be alone in my thoughts, to feel what I needed to feel, to sort through the pain, the loss, and all of these other emotions that surfaced in complex and complicated and often frustrating and extremely silly ways. I also had to just realize that just because I was good for a day or for a week, it didn't mean that I was okay. There would be 2 week periods where I was great and I felt like I could jump back into things and I could make videos. And I would tell members of the Discord community, hey, keep an eye out. Things might be moving in the right direction. And I would try to sort everything out. And once I researched a video or I tried to write something, and I would even get to the point of having half or even a full script, I would encounter the sinking feeling again, and it would set back in, and I would just need to sit back in the fray with my internal thoughts and feelings and just be alone and handle the grief in any way that I saw fit in those moments. And I can just say from experience that if you ever have to deal with something like this, please be more patient with yourself than I was with me. And try to do this as much as you possibly can because this is a journey through grief that is a marathon and it is not a sprint in any way, shape, or form. And the strange thing about it is the more you decide to try to sprint or speed run through it, the slower you actually go. So, beyond that, I was also having a lot of feelings of frustration when it came to the very topics on this channel that I was covering. I think it goes without saying that sometimes this channel covers topics that are not always the most joyful. In fact, joy tends to be the opposite of what I experience with a lot of these topics. We here talk about issues that involve life or death situations. We talk about violence. We talk about situations and experiences of people who are struggling for one reason or another. We talk about systemic injustice. The point is, we discuss the realities of living under a capitalist, cis heteronormative, racist patriarchy, and all the not so wonderful details that entails those topics. We cover things from climate change to police brutality to the very laws on the books that harm workers day in and day out. And writing these scripts and finding ways to cover these topics in a tasteful, meaningful, and informative way is not always the easiest thing to do. And while grieving certainly didn't help matters at all when it came to my latest videos before this one, the topics that I found myself covering in those videos actually left me feeling drained, disheartened, and devastated. Truthfully, I was feeling incapable of articulating just how obvious I thought some of the issues within the topics I was covering should be. In my last video, as an example, I outlined how and why child labor was bad. And I just felt like I was stating things that should have been overtly obvious and somehow wasn't and isn't to some people. And I just sat there not knowing how to express to everyone why child labor was bad. It's just something that seems like it should be so obvious, something that should be so visceral within us that we should be able to just point at it and say, look at it. Just look how bad it is. And that's really all I wanted to do. I wanted to point at the screen and say, look how obviously bad this is. And somehow I had to take these obvious realities and put those into rational arguments and reasonable statements that, again, didn't even feel like they needed to be said. Then, upon revisits to certain broader topics, like when I had to revisit things that I'd already covered before, I didn't know what to say that hadn't already been said. At that point, it felt like the topic had been covered, even if new information had come out about it. And I just sat there feeling like I was repeating myself over and over again. And maybe that's what needed to be done, but that didn't feel great. And on top of that, some of the systemic injustice in these topics infuriate and disgust me on a visceral level. And so I felt like I needed to mitigate some of that righteous anger that I was experiencing and literal outrage that I was experiencing to try to successfully utilize it not as a reactionary experience, but as a tool and energy source to focus on pinpointing the root of the injustice that I was trying to describe. And on top of all this, since I'm being honest about my frustrations anyway, I also find it disheartening that more people are not more vocal about the types of topics like the ones I was covering. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong places, or maybe the algorithm is steering me wrong, but I swear I was one of the only channels talking about some of these very topics and issues that I felt were the most important. When it came to topics like child labor, infrastructure, water security, and so much more that you can just scroll through in the list of videos that I have on this channel. Maybe that's changed in the past year? I'm not sure. But either way, I think if you followed me before this video, you realize that I don't care if I'm the center of attention or even the focus of my own videos. In fact, I'd really rather not be. I'd rather not be the person in the center of the attention in these videos. But the topics I am covering feel very significant and important, and I do think they need to be addressed. And I recognize that I'm a small channel. And while I appreciate every single person who takes the time to watch these videos, I do want the actual topics to be seen by a much larger audience. Because I want people to see these topics whether I'm the one covering them or not. I know that covering these topics, I'm also not hitting the most social media savvy topics. I'm not hitting the things that may be rage baiting or frustrating to people on Twitter at that particular moment in time. And unfortunately, I'm hitting the topics that a lot of people either find extremely dull and mundane or otherwise boring, or are just absolutely depressing. However, it's these seemingly boring and mundane topics, and often some of the most depressing, that have kept leftist movements historically relevant. And in many cases, they have been the most grounded and important topics that have affected and been about the daily happenings of people and have influenced the standard of living of people the most. More than anything, I want people to see beyond the surface level and to look past symbols and smokescreens on these topics and to see these struggles that people deal with on a daily basis as substantial, and to see themselves in these struggles as well, because it could very well be them. I want people to empathize with these experiences. Now, perhaps you're thinking that what would I say to someone, who just voiced all this if it wasn't me who just said it? Perhaps you're thinking, well, if nobody else is covering it, isn't that all the more reason you should keep making videos like that? And yeah, you are probably right. But in that moment, especially last year, I felt alone, and on some level, I felt like I was just screaming into a void. Even with hundreds of people watching my videos, I still felt alone. And unfortunately, that was not something that I could get past, especially when I was the one who had to get in front of the camera and try to articulate everything and try to make my experiences and understandings on these topics known. And given that loneliness, it felt also like I had to make more and more videos on these topics, and that I had to refine things so much more with each video that I made. And that only refueled the loneliness each time, because I was the one who was dealing with this end of the camera. I was the one who was in my thoughts by myself while trying to make all of this come out to you all. Every time I tried to put the words on the page, and every time I tried to put the script together into a video, it made the cycle feel like I was and the work that I was putting into all of this into a void that wasn't being appreciated or heard. And that's probably what hurt the worst. That feeling that I was essentially wasting my time on things that people didn't care about anyway. That said, I need to emphasize that I do appreciate every single one of you that watched my videos, that continued to appreciate my content even in the year that I've had to take off. And I do think that I've gotten a little bit more of a handle on that perspective since then. And I do want to start making videos on these very important topics again. My perspective feels refreshed, and I want to try and give it another go. Maybe this time without exhausting myself, maybe this time without draining myself quite as much, and maybe with a little bit less of that loneliness and those feelings that I was encountering. And I do want my topics in the future to feel a little more fluid and be open when it comes to the videos and topics and experiences that I'm having in terms of my emotions. So that's where I've been, and that's where I am, and that's where I'm headed. In an ideal reality at this point, where I want to start getting into video making again, I'm looking at making 1 or 2 videos a week. And hopefully trying to build some consistency back into this channel and see where that takes us. Now I'm hoping to upload either Wednesdays and or Fridays every week, but I will try to keep you all posted if this changes for one reason or another, and not let a year slip by between videos this time. I also just want to thank you all for your patience while I did sort all of this out for myself. Believe it or not, I actually did try to get this video out to you all sooner, and every time I sat in front of the camera, trying to put these words into perspective, trying to analyze what I was feeling in my heart, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel like I was being honest or genuine, even when I was. And it just felt like I was stuck in this box that I couldn't claw myself out of. And I am glad that I took the time to grieve and process my emotions when it came to these heavy topics and the loneliness that I felt, and to just sort through everything. And again, while I do recognize how many of you watched and learned from, and maybe even enjoyed my videos, I just am glad to be back in this place where I can start doing that for you all again. So I just want to let you know where I'm headed next, at least very immediately. Next video, I'm going to be revisiting the topic that I left off on last time. I'm going to be revisiting the topic of child labor. And that video is already well into being complete before you're actually seeing this video. So I can actually guarantee that one for next week. So that's where we're at. And let's see where things go from there. But again, 1 to 2 videos a week, Wednesdays and Fridays. And I just want to thank you all again. But with that said, my name is Anarchist Terra, and I thank you all for watching.